Welcome back, everybody, to Selling Circular. Nope, I did it again. One more time.
Now
I
you know.
got it.
Now you
I
know.
got it. Now
Yeah,
I
now
know.
you know.
Welcome back, Captains of Circularity, to Selling Circular, our podcast, hosted by Sabira Lakhani, yours truly. I'm with Reaply, a marketplace and a SaaS enterprise product for companies to track what they've purchased and to be able to reuse them. And I am joined by my favorite partner in crime.
Garr of Loop Layer, where we are really focused on remanufacturing. So we're looking at how do we reimagine revenue generation by thinking about how do we take products back and get them back into their sales cycle, but through a zero waste type of growth channel. It's fun, and we've got some good stuff to talk about today, don't we?
I'm very excited. Well, last time we closed out with Eric from Urban Machine, thinking about or feeling inspired by what opportunities might exist in the world of existing waste streams, existing commodities that are being wasted. And we were noodling on what does it look like today? What sort of inspiration is out there today in addition to Urban Machine that we could dive into so that future entrepreneurs could feel that inspiration and possibility of, here are some examples of people doing this already.
I think it was actually then your question. I mean, you generally go, help us. You're very good at letting people express how they can help others get into our industry. That's where we
Mhm.
found our passion, was addressing waste streams, and it was great that that was his piece of advice. And we took that actually right into this conversation that we had with Elin, which we can introduce coming up. But you're right. Eric's biggest piece of advice was find those untapped waste streams, and we've got some couple to talk about. It was my job today to go find those off the kind of did off the top of my head because these are some of my favorites. But you were quickly like, oh yeah, these are all my favorites too. And then there's more to come, but we get to now talk through some of these. So. Not the top three of exhaustive list, but a top three that we
Right.
want to talk about today was we have a couple different industries. So one, we have a food waste solution. The second, we have a built environment door solution, which we can talk about. And then the third is a human waste solution, which I'm actually very excited just to chat about. So the first one, we've got Chopple Farms. And what I love about Chopple is, and I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly, so someone will correct me, or even I'll get a message from their leadership. But ultimately, what I really liked about this company is actually you might have even seen this company, and I first heard of this company because it was on Shark Tank, and they were trying to reimagine human food by creating chips that were made out of cricket protein, cricket flour. And I actually messaged their leadership this, and I got a reply, and it was so nice to talk to them. Where that was one of the first companies for me as a Shark Tank listener and fan that helped me understand that there were different business models out there that were thinking about using waste streams or building products that had a different type of model to them other than the very traditional linear business models. So what I really liked them is they understood that you could create cricket flour and that the flour was less intensive than other manufacturing products such as maybe wheat or other types of flours. And ultimately, you could actually feed your crickets and create this feedstock through other types of maybe even agricultural waste. Well, turns out in the pandemic, that model needed to change a little bit. Not only was the adoption of cricket protein not really taking on as much as they thought it would, but ultimately they saw a different need that they could address. And they created a modular, even mobile system in which you could actually hook up waste streams. Think about it in the sense of agricultural or even manufacturing byproducts. So this might be uh, high quality. In some cases, I mean, think of a good example. Maybe you can think of one with me. I'm thinking of hops. or some sort of food byproduct that's food grade, but ultimately goes wasted. It might go to a landfill. It maybe gets composted. Sometimes you have enough for it to be massively composted, or it gets turned into maybe pig feed or some other animal feed. But if you don't have massive quantities, well, then sometimes it's actually just going to go to waste. And so they decided to say, hey, what if we created these modular units that can actually turn that food byproduct, that perfectly good waste byproduct, into food for what's known as black soldier fly larvae. And that larvae, if you're feeding the larvae are going to grow, but then they're going to not only become a perfectly good high quality protein source themselves, so the larvae become a protein source, but also they're going to create, and I hope this is the technical term, like a frass. And a frass is essentially their manure, their byproduct. So they create that poop, which then ultimately itself can then be turned into a product for agriculture. And so you have this great solution where you can hook up this product that essentially addresses the direct waste stream from a manufacturer, and then creates new products as a opportunity to really generate revenue from that waste stream. Thoughts? Where have you seen this? How have you heard about this before? Download me.
Yeah, I actually saw this model in India before I heard about it in the US. And so when I was working in India, there was an intern, his name was Abhi, who had worked on our team, and he ended up graduating from undergrad and I think going through some pitch competitions with similar ideas. I think maybe they started with silkworms or something, if I'm remembering correctly. And then they evolved into this same modular, kind of like container-based or decentralized system that you could operate on site to process food waste with black soldier flies and then turn that into some sort of like value added product for,
oh, fascinating.
I think either other animal feed, like you were mentioning, or even potentially fertilizer. So I think what ended up happening there was that the story to investors, it only really catches on if you have incredible returns, and it depends who your investors are. Are they willing to make that infrastructure play, or maybe have a more impact investing lens of wanting the social and environmental benefits at equal to or more than the financial returns? And so I didn't keep up with what happened there, but that model was, it's really great because I think the black soldier flies, I don't know if they can live everywhere. I think they need like a particular temperature or something. So it was cool to hear that it was happening here in the US as well, but I should do more research on that.
Well, I love that you brought up the investment aspect to that, because that tends to then, and we've seen this in the industry, is what type of investment horizon line is best for some of these circular economy solutions. And ultimately, what we've always talked about is how, and we talked about this actually on the last episode, which is how do you create a solution that fits within an existing system, and is able to augment and create value within that system, and therefore drive value, create value more quickly, while also disrupting for a longer term, more zero waste horizon line. And that's going to deliver maybe the best case scenario for an investor to say, oh, I believe in this. I'm seeing the value immediately, but also here's the longer term horizon line of an exponential potential growth pattern. And so I think you brought that up because that kind of speaks to number 2 on the list, which is Andrew Ellsworth's company's Doors Unhinged. And I actually had the pleasure of speaking to him on a previous podcast. And he was great because this is a solution in which he's addressing a direct waste stream, and literally opening the door to a new future of salvaging these. Yes, exactly. I did it. Salvaging doors, literal doors, from being thrown out. And the model here is very simple. He's going to companies that are demolishing existing buildings, other types of infrastructure that have doors, Luckily, doors being a fairly consistent use in any building. So again, you have your feedstock, but what was complicating about doors is no one had an ability to say, hey, we have this great feedstock, we just don't know where to put it. And so Andrew was really solving a problem to say, hey, I'll take these doors. Now, the next problem is most contractors, most architects, most designers, they want uniformity in their buildings. They want uniformity in their doors. And so ultimately, the next goal for Doors Unhinged was to really solve this idea of saying, okay, how do we really refurbish these doors so that they can look the most uniform as possible for the different applications, again, of the next building. And so that's really the goal there, is to take as many doors in as you can, make them look as uniform as possible for the next projects to be reused. And check out the website. It's a fantastic model that I love talking about because it's simple. People understand doors. We interact with them every day, and you can't possibly imagine that a door just gets thrown away, but boy, do they. And ultimately, it's addressing that untapped waste stream is that really that big piece of advice.
I love that you talked about storage too, and I think there's an element of timing and storage as well as the
Yes.
aggregation and scale that you mentioned, which is, you know, is it worth it to store stuff and for how long? And what kind of numbers and volume do you need to get for it to be worth it? And there's also the element of, which we heard also from Eric at Urban Machine, the same kind of theme here is you have the feedstock, but is the demand side ready to spring at purchasing these refurbished doors? And are they willing to do it at the scale that matches your supply? Do they have needs that are larger than your supply? And how would they fill the gap? And so there's a lot of nuance that would go into the economics of that, and just, any entrepreneur would need to consider and do the math on.
It, I you we've talked about wood a bunch now, and so even as you were talking, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go log onto the site real quickly, and I'm gonna see what types of doors there are. And again, these are higher quality wood doors that ultimately we're gonna just get thrown away. And again, this comes down to your point, working with someone who's making those decisions. They're going to say, oh, actually, if you can get me to this type of maybe threshold of uniformity, I can pitch this to my client, and ultimately it's going to save them X amount more than they would have spent new, and then that becomes a win-win scenario. And so again, it's a great model addressing a very, I say quote unquote, simple feedstock, nothing simple, but ultimately addressing a feedstock that has some aggregation, uniformity, and sales questions that need to be answered. But if you can really build a model around that, I think you can make for a very successful business. Which I don't have a great segue into this next one. And so ultimately, when we start talking about, there's nothing I can say in terms of sales, other than probably this company is doing a fairly disruptive sales model, which is we're talking about porta potties, I think, on this one. And this company is called Wasted. And I actually love their designs. I love their marketing. But it is a porta potty company that is thinking about how to actually monetize or utilize the human waste generated and deposited in these porta potties. Tell me, how have you ever seen this? Have you ever come across this? I don't know if this is something that you would have.
Yes. Also in
See,
my
I know
time
you always
in
got
India.
something. Yes.
In my time in India, we came across a company called Banca Biolu, if I'm remembering that correctly. And they
Okay.
were doing some sort of service or maybe like uh, a chemical, or not chemical's the wrong word. Catalyst is
Yeah,
probably
totally.
the word
Something.
that I'm
Yeah, yeah,
looking
yeah.
for. To speed up the decomposition of the human waste, or to store it. And in the world of India, that's super important because the access to toilets and clean toilets is not necessarily like, the concept of porta potties doesn't really exist in India, or not that I have seen, or not at scale, right? You have like the open
Right.
land, and there's like a lot of social cultural history around open defecation. So their solution was an attempt if I'm remembering correctly, because now it's been years, is to provide a place for clean, using a toilet in a clean
Yeah.
environment and being able to like process the human waste
Yes.
faster is part of that.
And you segue perfectly into that chemical use, which is I don't think I quite understand, and I would probably want to do some further research into this. Is what I was seeing is they're trying to actually make a more organic version of some sort of masking chemical that goes into all these porta potties. What we're maybe familiar with is that very, very blue liquid that sits at the bottom maybe of these porta
Mm.
potties or gets used in those applications. But what types of chemicals are those, and where is that actually, where is that stream going, of that material, and is that beneficial then to whatever downstream it's reservoir that sits in, whether that is a natural reservoir or a processed, who knows. I hope it's all being processed, it probably is. But ultimately with wasted, I think what they're really looking into again is these newer organic types of ways to probably catalyze this waste and maybe turn it into some sort of biofuel, sort of fertilizer, and then ultimately use that and continue to market that and utilize that material. All three of these companies we've actually we have reached out to. I reached out to them, so I look forward to having them on the podcast, and we get to actually talk about their models and maybe dive a little bit deeper
Super
as
cool.
they come and join us.
We love that. I'm
With that, then,
excited. Oh,
yes, go for it.
as
Yes, you're
we,
excited.
I'm excited. Well, I think uh, the context of some examples are really great to hear, and uh, these are all in the U.S., correct?
Yes, these are all in the U.S.
Well, I was excited to meet our next guest, Elin Bergman, because she has more of the European context, the Nordic context, and that was really cool for me to learn more about. I've had an Indian context and a U.S. context, and so tell us more about Elin.
Yeah, I mean, I've exclusively had, to some degree, a U.S. context.
Yeah.
So it was great to hear from Elin. I mean, I think she's refreshingly candid about
Yeah.
both the Nordic successes from my U.S. context. I mean, this is where, on my end, I'm always, and we kind of get to this right as we start talking, is I'm always thinking about, okay, someone else in some other economy is doing this better in the U.S. And it was really refreshing to have her say it might be true in some cases, but in other cases it's not. And in most cases, everyone's trying to do better in general. As we're going to get into it, I loved hearing the differences about our two cultures, and how we view success, how we view solutions and innovation. And I'm excited to get into it. I think it was a great podcast. Again, so refreshingly candid in all of her takes. And currently, right now, if you look on LinkedIn and connect with her or follow her, she's actually on a larger speaking tour through the EU and other types of surrounding countries. So she's going on and speaking about circular economy. What found was so funny actually is we weren't able to actually maybe connect at any U.S. events because she doesn't fly. So I don't think we actually covered that, but that was something she shared with us personally, and
Hmm.
that's exciting that she's really taking this to the next level of maintaining that the lower emissions travel. And so we look forward to meeting her maybe in person when we're over there at some point, or she takes the time, I think, as she said, to come on a
A
ship and come over to
sailing
the
trip,
U.S.
yeah.
Yes, a nice
Yeah.
sailing trip.
Yeah, she's a sailor similar to Ellen MacArthur, so that's pretty cool. One thing that I took away from her conversation was that how much the US culture has spread worldwide and how much that's influencing consumption behavior. I also just thought of kind of like the parallel to other colonies where, like the world of reuse and the world of preserving your resources and being more in touch with nature existed before really rich economies
The
got a hold
the
of those.
infusion of capitalism. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
yes,
that's right.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
just think of like even the Indian context, like when I lived there, it was really easy to get my shoes repaired, like literally down the steps from
Hmm.
my home. And, that's a little more difficult here, but it's just kind of more in your face over there as to that reuse economy or repair economy. And but you also nowadays see the influence of Western culture like overtaking all of that, and how our belief system here in the US and infusion of capitalism is like really reached far and wide. So it was fascinating to hear Elin reflect on that in the Nordic context as well. And I'm excited for y'all to hear it directly from her.
Well, with that, we'll go right into the episode. Of course, reach out to us with any questions. We're happy to connect on LinkedIn, and we look forward to any feedback. Please keep it coming, everyone. And we'll see you on the next episode. I want to know, how did you weave yourself into this industry? Because it's almost kind of the best part of our industry too, is whether that's circular economy or sustainability, is that it kind of takes all minds. It takes everyone to kind of come together, and it takes it from many different paths. Share your story in that. That's a unique one.
Yeah, well, so my background story is that I have a mother who's always been very much into environmental issues. She was, when I was a kid, always when we saw like cowboys and Indian, movies, she was always rooting for the Native Americans and like, oh, they are living in harmony with nature, and then the white person came and just messed everything up. Um, so I kind of got that with my backbone, like you should take care of nature just like the natives did. And we also have natives in Sweden, the Sapmi, and we did the same thing here. So it's not just an American thing. It's been everywhere. We kind of the white man has kind of conquered nature instead of living in harmony with nature, and that's the problem. Anyway, so I got that with my kind of yeah, with my from my mother, from I was super small. And I kind of were that person. I didn't realize until I met some people that actually knew me in middle school and high school. Like, you're always like that. You're always like telling people to pick up their trash, and I was like, oh, did I? Anyway, and then I went to university, and I studied media production, and I kind of started doing a lot of movie festivals and computer festivals. Had my first job in the computer games industry. I launched some of the biggest games in the world in Sweden. You probably heard about World of Warcraft and Half-Life and so on. Super fun industry, and from there I got headhunted into the movie industry. So I worked for 20th Century Fox for a few years. I was a promotion manager. Well, I met a lot of Hollywood stars, and I did gala premieres and things. But what I mostly did was to work with big promotional campaigns. So basically, I worked with Matrix and Star Wars and X-Men and all of those. And I tried to sell the movies more by making kind of the X-Men and Samsung Mobile and the Ice Age meals on McDonald's, and yeah, basically try to get people to buy more crap they don't need. And that was not feeling very good for me. And then after a few years, An Inconvenient Truth with Al Gore came out, the movie. And I was like, oh shit, I can't do this anymore. I have to, work on the right side of history here. So I decided to quit my job and started studying sustainability took night classes. And then I started working for this homeless organization instead. So I was working for the communications and fundraising department, and I learned kind of CSR issues and like a bit connected to more social sustainability. But that got me my first job in the sustainability sector then after a while, and as a communication and marketing director for a small climate consultancy. And that's where I saw for the first time like the power of networks. Like they had a business network called Blick Business Leaders Initiative on Climate Change. So they gathered all these big companies and tried to be an opposite voice, because at that time the Swedish Business Association was kind of climate skeptics and didn't want to do anything with climate, and saying that they will it will ruin their business. But anyway, we're working at that consultancy for a short while, but I thought this was so great. And then when I started at this other consultancy, we started something similar called the Haga Initiative, where we got like really big companies like McDonald's Sweden and like really big ones to really say that we want to have that opposite voice as well, and really challenge. And that also helped why that's a reason, one of the reasons why we have the ambitious climate target we have now in Sweden. We're going to be net zero positive by 2045. So that's really great, and I took that with me. And after working at these consultancies, I got a job at WWF Sweden. And then at the same time, this was in 2013, I think, I went to a lecture. And I'm a sailor, so I went to this lecture because I love sailing, and the lecturer were Ellen MacArthur. And yeah, and I was a super fan of hers because she was, single-handedly sailing around the world in her 20s and broke the world record, and like strong woman as well. And I didn't know anything about circular economy at the time, but I was sitting there, and it was actually Cradlenet, one of the organizations that I work for now, that invited her. So I was sitting there in the audience, listening to her story about using her sailing boat as a kind of like a likeness or an analogy for the planet. Like, we have this planet, the boat, and we have these few precious resources. We have water, we have food, we have energy. And if we don't take care of those scarce resources, we'll not make it around the planet. We will not make it. The people will basically starve if we use it in the grander perspective. And I thought it was such a powerful story, and especially also because I can relate, because I sail, that after this lecture, I was like, oh my God, I need to dedicate my life to this. This is so simple. Everything was circular 100 years ago. We just forgot about it. We need to mimic nature's own behavior and ecosystems. It's brilliant. It's so simple. I have to tell everybody about this. So after that lecture, I contacted the chairman at the time of Cradlenet, and I said, I need to get engaged with this. What can I do? I can, make coffee, polish your shoes, whatever. I need to, be a part of this. And he was like, yeah, well, maybe you can get elected into the board next year. And I was like, oh, what? Okay. So it just took a few months, and then was a new election, and I got voted in. And I was mostly helping out with events and marketing and communication at first. And this is just purely voluntary, because I was working at WWF, like as my pay job, daytime. But I was still, asking so many questions. I'm like, what's the vision? What's the mission? What's the target group? What are we going to do? How are we going to get more people on board? That they were like, oh, maybe can't you be the chairman next year instead? So after that, I became the chairman, and then I've been kind of running it since then. So that was my kind of Cradlenet story. And yeah, I was hired also at WWF as a not promotion manager. I was a corporate partnership manager. So basically took care of some of the big partnerships we had and tried to make big companies more sustainable and so on. But since I was working with Cradlenet on my spare time, I was like only talking about circular economy at my work. I'm like, oh, WWF, should we be working on this too? So after a while, they kind of gave up and gave me, I became the circular economy expert at WWF as well. So I was a circular economy expert there for 8 years. And then I started another organization in 2018 when I met a lot of other Nordic similar organizations as Cradlenet when I was in the Netherlands at a big conference called the Holland Circular Economy Week, which was a great event. And anyway, I found equally frustrated people from the Nordics that were very frustrated with their governments that nothing was happening. Finland was doing really great, but Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Iceland, nothing was happening there. It was basically us, the small NGOs, doing this on a voluntary basis that were doing something. So I started inviting these people to meetings and like, what can we do about it? Can we start something together? And that eventually turned into Nordic Circular Hotspot, which is the other organization that I run. Yeah, so that's kind of my story behind where I am today.
I love that, mostly as an example also for where passion can get you, for a topic. I will speak for myself, although I think Sabira will agree, of we are both very passionate about this industry, and that has led us, if we keep following that, it keeps leading us to the right path. What I love your journey. We probably, Sabir and I, have a similar journey in that sense of just trying to, again, connect dots for ourselves and find the right opportunities. What could you talk about for someone who's listening to you right now where they're thinking, oh, but I can't do that, or I can't, I could never get involved because look at those people over there. They're doing something interesting. I just don't know how. What words of advice do you have for that person who's thinking that, and it's like, no, you have the opportunity. What's your word of advice for them?
Well, there's a sneaker company that has a nice slogan called "Just do it." Nobody knows what they're doing until they're doing it, basically. So, I mean, there's no good time to start. I mean, you just do it whenever you can, and you learn on the way. I think that's a great. Another great saying is fake it till you make it. I mean, everybody is basically just yeah, just struggling and learning. And I think it's so good that you don't know. But if I mean, most people don't even know what they want to do. So if you know what were in some aspect that you want to work in sustainability, just try to grasp whatever you can. Get the first job in, and then you figure it out on the way. You will. I mean, passion doesn't happen to everybody. So I think we're blessed to be passionate about something, to find I got, it's like a almost a religious experience, like circular economy, that's my calling. Nobody, I mean, it's not very common that we get that,
Right.
but I did
That's true.
that, so I had to like follow it. But if you just think that you want to do something good for the planet, find your way in and just follow it, and it will figure itself out on the way.
Even in the most micro aspect, and Sabira, I'll turn to you, which is in the micro aspect, just shooting you that message on LinkedIn of saying, I really like the way you're thinking about this. Would you ever be interested in talking further? It's like, just do it. Just, you might as well, because there are other people out there willing to talk, willing to engage with you, and ultimately help you along this journey as well. And I love that advice. Just do it. Sabira.
Yeah, I love that that was kind of a universal principle that we share. But you do hint at in your story, in your journey, that there was a time when the Nordic states or countries were, or the people in the circular economy were frustrated about the progress that the government was making. Can you tell us a little bit about where y'all were and how you got to where you are today?
Mm, absolutely. So we were basically nowhere when we were there in the Netherlands. Some things have happened since then. Finland is still way, way ahead of the other Nordic countries. We are still not doing as much as we should. In Sweden, at least, and most, I guess, all the Nordic countries now have a circular economy strategy. Not all of them have roadmaps. Some have roadmaps and no strategy. Also interesting. In Sweden, we have a roadmap and a strategy. We started with the strategy and then we got the roadmap. But the roadmap is not very good. And nothing is really happening. We thought when the strategy and the roadmap would come in Sweden, there would be so much action. No, we used to have a very hands-on government that were leading the business sector and well, the population forward when it came to sustainability and so on. Now there's basically no leadership, and they're going backwards into the future, which is really interesting and also very scary. We are in the middle of, triple crisis with climate change and biodiversity pollution and everything, and we just have no political leadership. And it's kind of the same in most of the Nordic countries. It's starting to move a bit in Norway, but that's a big oil nation, though. We have this, if you want to really know how circular the Nordics are, we have these circularity gap reports made by Circular Economy. So you can see, first of all, that globally the world is 7.2% circular, and it's going in the opposite direction there. We started in 9.6 or something. We're down to 7.2 now. So the world is very little circular. But if you look at, for instance, Norway, they're only 2.8% circular. Sweden is 3.4. Denmark is only 4. Iceland is a bit better. They're around 10% circular. But it's still, we
But
are
they
not
kind of have
good.
to be.
Yeah.
Iceland, yeah, maybe that's their force, their hand a little
Exactly.
bit.
They can't really,
Yes.
they have to make sure they're taking care of the they can do like a boat because they're an island in the middle
Exactly.
of nowhere. So they
They
have
get the sailing analogy. Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but still, so the Nordics are worse than the global average. We are horrible, and that's because we are so rich. We're very rich countries, just like you are. We overconsume like crazy. We have the what I call the IKEA and H&M effect. Uh, we are very trendy. We're supposed to rip out kitchens as soon as we move into a new house, even though the kitchen is perfectly fine and working. We could be repaired and upgraded and so on. And we change clothes very much because of the, we have to follow seasons and H&M, the H&M effect. And we got past the whole, take, make, waste, thing. We just take and we waste. Sometimes we don't even use the clothes once. And we have
Hmm.
enormously big cars, we have enormously big houses, and we have usually more than one house as well. So yeah, we have some problems in the Nordics. So we really have to take care of it. We don't know. We haven't made a gap report for Finland yet, so we don't know what it looks like there.
That's fascinating. I'd be curious why, and we can get into that because that's kind of where my question leads, which is in the states we can often, or at least lately, we've been more probably okay with the fact that our leadership isn't pushing the boundaries from a social environmental aspect as much because almost probably growing within our DNA is more and more of a sense of, well, businesses will lead the way. When this might be incorrect, but it's the nature of what I grew up with, which is thinking, oh, we're not the Nordic countries. The Nordic countries do it differently over there. They have the governments help people and their life is better, but it's so expensive. It's so, the US will never be like that. Where do you think these two cultures or at least why do you think they seem to be more aligned? I mean, they seem to be moving
Mm,
towards some sort of mean of, well, it's too difficult and life is pretty good. We might as well keep this going. We might as well keep the
mm.
consumption going, keeping. Why is it up to businesses maybe now, less leaders politically, in your opinion, from maybe a Nordic sense?
Well, I can speak from a Swedish sense. I think, first of all, the
Please,
Nordics
yeah.
have been very Americanized. We have been looking at you guys for a long time, like how you do things. We are, uh, well, like most countries, I guess, but we look a lot at American movies. We consume, music and videos, and we also got those it's cool to have big houses and cribs and all those TV shows and
Exactly. Thank you, MTV. Yes.
right and yeah. So I think that the big consumer thing before, I mean, 70s and 80s, it was shameful to be rich. That's why the CEO of IKEA, he was like looking like the most poor person on the street. He was like, I'm taking the bus, and if we had a board meeting, he was making them hot dogs and like the cheapest food ever, and that was kind of his persona. But then he moved to a tax haven in Switzerland, so it didn't really add up in the end. Anyway, so it used to be shameful to be rich. Now, because of all the Americanized things, we're supposed to have our private jets and do all this stupid, sorry, things that you
Um,
thought was a good idea. And we're also kind of taking over a lot of things that's bad in other aspects. Like we used to have just 40 years ago, the richest person in an office was the CEO or the chairman of the board. And they were making like 25, 30 times as much as the poorest person. Now we're kind of adapting to the American way. It's like 300 times more. And it's like, why are we doing that? Because it's like, oh, now it's a global business. We should do what the Americans do. Otherwise, they will take over, whatever. So we kind of adapted some of the not so smart things that you did, which is not very good. And that has the same effects that you have. I mean, we kind of bought into the whole idea that if we had all these stuff and big cars and stuff, we would be happy. But we know, and you know now, that we're not happier. It's not like when we're lying on our deathbeds, like, oh, I wish I bought another car. No, It's like, I wished I spent more time with my family and my friends, and I did adventures and, really lived my life. It's not about sitting in an office and, building a big pile of money that you can't spend during your lifetime. That's not what makes you happy, and it's not good for anybody. It just destroys the planet and your life. I think we need to go back to realizing that. Yeah, I don't think you in the US have ever realized that much, but maybe you're coming to that conclusion now because you have finally realized that, working hard won't make you rich. You can't even buy houses. I mean, your generation, you're struggling now for the first time. So now you see behind the curtain of the whole trickle down economy, and it doesn't work. So you need another economy, and that's just why you're probably listening and think this is good. But we also need to learn this again. Like, okay, what is important? And I think now people in the new generation are understanding more. Maybe I shouldn't work so much. That's not so interesting for me. What do I want to do? I want to find myself in other aspects. I want to have good experiences. I want to share things. I don't have to own it, you know. So, but yeah, we have a lot of. I think we have a similar journey ahead, but we have all the social benefits that you don't. So you're struggling even more than we do.
I'm curious if you feel hopeful because it's really interesting to hear that your countries went through the journey of coming up with policy, coming up with strategies and roadmaps, and kind of abandoning socially and politically in this moment. But because you did some of that legwork, if you can tell us about like how was that journey of coming up with the strategies and roadmaps and influencing policy, and then now that that legwork is there and done behind you, are you hopeful that we come back, that your countries come back to that, because the work has already been done?
Mm, good question. Well, I think the organizations that I run, we were part of pushing that we would get the strategy and the roadmaps. We were writing debate articles. We were doing seminars. We're doing, yeah, we did a lot of activities together with a lot of other organizations to finally get those strategies and roadmaps in place. We were so happy when they came. Even though the roadmap in Sweden, it contains 100 things the government should do, but it's mostly like we should look into this, or we should, do research on this and that. So it's not so much like very concrete actions. And the other part is like 50% of those 100 points are already decided by the European Union. So that was like, okay, but why make 100 points if they're already decided? But that's a different thing. At least we had something to go on. And what we were trying to do was to make it, because it was missing a big point. And the big point is there's no national target for Sweden and no deadline, especially. I mean, you can say, oh, we have a strategy, we're gonna be circular, but is that in 3,000 years? When are we going to be circular? It doesn't really, give people energy or companies energy to act if they don't know when they're supposed to be done. So we were hoping they would set like a similar target as they have in Finland, for instance. They have a national target. They're going to base their whole economy on circular principles by 2035. Perfect. Let's do that in all the Nordics. This is something we're pushing now. Um, so yeah, I mean, yes, we're disappointed. We changed the government in Sweden in last fall. The new government, they don't even mention circular economy. They're like shocked when they get a circular economy question, like, oh yeah, that was my issue. Yeah, we should probably do something about it. So we have to like remind them all the time. We do like annually a big seminar where we send out a form to all the political parties in Sweden. We ask them about their political ambitions. They have to answer, and then we rank. We put points to their answers, so to speak, and then we can make a winner and a loser that answering this. And then we publish it. We put them on the stage, and they have to defend it. And we have even not only ourselves as experts doing this, but we also have two external experts that comments on our ranking of their answers. So we do that on an annual basis, and now they're kind of like, oh, we're proud, we won the Cradlenet and Serieco, ranking, whatever. But then we have to also follow up and see, okay, but what did you actually? You answered something, but then you acted like this. as it, is it true what you're answering? So that's another aspect of it. So that's how we work with this anyway. And we rate debate articles. We're also interviewed in media more and more on more high level media. So it's good to get a voice. And now I'm also speaking more on an international stage, more and more, which is also good because then you can share experiences and say, hey, do this, don't do that. We tried this, it didn't work, this worked, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
I'm already jealous of the statement you got to say in that of we got to rank all of the political parties. Because that's not I don't know how much you know about our political system,
Yeah.
but those are
Well, you
not
have
the
two parties.
yes, it's not the field of choices that probably as many
No.
as we would like. But ultimately, I think what you said is so key of and it's something Sabir and I again have been enjoying, which is we are now starting to talk to many more people, and just as much as it's international, we find, especially when I was working at Reaply, and Sabira still sees this, is even jurisdictions and municipalities here in the States are so different. The difference between San Francisco and San Antonio and Chicago and New York, all of them have things to learn from many international counterparts, but also each other. And so it's been really interesting to see, oh, why do these things succeed in certain regions? Is it because of the person that was super passionate, or these four policies that maybe one city had that for one reason or another the other one didn't? I liked seeing that actually in the, I believe it was the I'm pulling up the document now, so apologize, but it's the Nordic reuse, the policies enabling the reuse of construction products in the Nordics. This document I was reading in preparation, which is it went through and to the point that you've been making earlier, was highlighting the differences in policies and the measures that each of the countries need to work on. I noticed then, and I'm glad you've been elaborating further, and I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit further, is Finland and Norway had most of these sort of buckets filled out, whether it was setting carbon limit value around construction, requiring different resource screenings and pre-demolition sort of types of audits. Why was Finland so ahead of the curve? What has enabled them to be a leader and setting an example for everyone else in the Nordics as well as everyone globally?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I love this. So I have a theory, and I think the theory is that the former prime minister of Finland, his name was Jyrki Katainen. Yeah, Jyrki Katainen. Anyway, and he was super passionate about not only circular economy but also AI. So he started like talking about this, and he kind of got, and that's the top level guy. That's like it would be Joe Biden, like super into circular economy. And he got everybody on board, and this was like, yeah, a long time ago. Anyway, and at the same time, the other Nordic countries were like super focused on climate. So we were working on our climate targets and strategies for that, which actually is something that Finland was lagging behind on because they were so super focused on the circular economy. So, I mean, in an ideal world, all of the Nordic countries had focused not only on climate but also circular economy and biodiversity and pollution and water and marine resources, everything in a holistic way. But as you know, most people and also political persons can only focus on one thing, and they try to do the most popular thing. And at the time it was climate change, so the other countries focused on that. But in Finland, they had Jyrki Katainen, so they focused on circular economy. And the thing is, this is what people usually think when they talk about Nordics and, oh, we're so sustainable. No, we have almost fossil-free energy production. That's not the same as being sustainable. Yes, check, we did that. So that's good. Absolutely. But about between 45 and 70% of the carbon emission comes from what we produce and what we consume. So that's the second half of the story, and we haven't even started that section yet. But the Finns have, but they have to have this catching up fast when it comes to the carbon and climate emissions and targets for that. So yeah. but now we're lagging behind them all aspects because of the new government. This is why we need to rank them and say, you're doing good here, you're doing bad here, and so on. And keep we can't let them go. We have to keep nagging them until they do better, basically.
I love that we're thinking at the macro scale here. I'm curious if you have um, any examples of micro like case studies where circular business models or experiments have worked out in the Nordic region, that again kind of framing for hope, right? Like opportunities that we could scale or copy. What have you seen that's worked?
Well, I do have a lot of examples of companies that are having circular business models that are very successful. I mean, I have one of my companies, Foxway, for instance, in my the network Cradlenet. They're working in circular IT. They're doing really, really well. They just took in 7 billion Swedish kronor new investments from Nordic Capital, for instance, and they're working with all the big Apples and Samsungs and all of those retailers of tech, and they trying to get it back and refurbish and repair not only once but like 3 times over, and like start secondary markets, and they're super successful. And now I think now with also inflation and prices of materials and components are going up so much, the big players are finally saying that, hey, there's money in this, and we should get on it because it's another revenue stream. So that's one example of a company. But then we ourselves, we were kind of frustrated because there's been so much talk about different business models, and especially one product as a service business models, or PaaS, as we talk, you call them. There was a lot of talk for many years that like this is the savior of all. If everybody goes into product as a service business models, it will solve everything. So we did this project together with a consultancy called Stena Circular Consulting 2 years ago, and we got this project EU funded, where we looked into those product as a service business models and looked at, okay, what makes them work when they work, and what makes them not work when they're not working? Because a lot of my members had tried them out, and they went bankrupt. It didn't work. But on the other hand, we have like companies trying this for 50 years. We have Rolls-Royce, for instance. They have that power by the hour concept. We have Xerox. They're kind of, instead of selling printers, they're selling like copies of that you're printing in your printer. So they're leasing out the printers, so to speak. Super successful. So we wanted to interview a lot of companies and ask them like, okay, what made you successful? What made you semi-successful? Or what made you fail? And kind of see if we could find some basic principles here. So we found 9 critical challenges, and we didn't want to just make a report where we say, hey, this is probably why this happened, and this is what you should do. But we even developed a methodology, like if you want to try this out, this is how you should do it. So it's free and it's open for everybody. You can download it. It's in English, and we now have we had 25 companies that helped us kind of try this methodology out, and then we had 3 that actually launched product as a service business models based on our methodology. So it's so new now that we can't really say that's super successful, but we hope that we can in a few years and say that, yeah, we helped them get to where they are. So that's what I'm hoping.
I love the product as a service exploration and methodology. I definitely we'll link to the doc in the show notes. I'm curious if you could tell us like 1 or 2 things that are critical as part of the methodology that make product as a service work.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of aspects, but I think one thing is that you need to really make clear that it's not more expensive to have a service than to buy the thing, because people think that, oh, well, if I buy this phone, I'll just pay for it once, but if I pay small installments, it's going to be so much more expensive. It's not. So that needs to be clear, and you need to make your calculations, and it needs to be clarified. I mean, there's other challenges, like people are used to buying things. It's comfortable. So what you need to do with your business model, you have to make it more attractive and maybe even easier to use than actually going out and buy something, which means that it's not probably good for all types of products, like a white cheap T-shirt, for instance. It's just better to go out and buy it. But if it's a wedding dress, then it's easier because it's a big purchase. You just use it once. Why would you buy it? I mean, it's just wasteful. And you usually put a lot of time and effort into finding it, right? So it's a different, depends on what you're going to use or buy or sell or so. So that's a few things at least.
That's coming to me next, which is really about what have you found then in terms of with the Nordic Circular Hotspot you all are able to provide in terms of that maybe that preliminary education, but also nurturing that community. How important has that been for the Nordics to probably realize their power together? I was reading what the 12th largest economy sort of grouped together. There's a big there's a big community there that can help push a global industry. What has that meant to sort of bring people together in various parts of the Nordics, but also then be an advocate globally?
Well, the whole idea was to make us much more resource efficient. I mean, right now in the Nordics, there's a lot of focus on circular economy in all the Nordic countries, but we have no overview of what's going on in Finland, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and so on, and Sweden. And we're basically putting taxpayer money into doing the same type of projects instead of learning what did they do in Finland, what worked there. It probably works in Sweden too. Maybe we can build on or scale up or do something. So that's one big part of it. And that's what we're doing. We do a lot of events. We communicate a lot what's going on. But we have a very, I mean, it's still a very small organization, and it's funded by Nordic Innovation, which is good. But I mean, in all honesty, what we would really like is some ownership by the governments. If you look at the hotspots in the Netherlands, for instance, that's the first ever hotspot ever made that we kind of try to mimic. They were founded by the ministries themselves, together with the business sector and academia. So they have like a base funding where they actually have governmental people working in the hotspot. It's kind of like a what do you call it? Like a marketing place to showcase how good the Netherlands are when it comes to circular economy implementation, companies and also research and so on. Beautiful. That's not how it is in the Nordics. It's still us struggling with a tiny piece of funding, trying to, it's still kind of on a voluntary basis a lot, tried to get the message out. This is why we need to collaborate more. This is the benefits. Look at the gap reports. See, so we kind of fill in the gaps, so to speak, on what needs to be done. So there's still so much left to do here, but I feel that we really can play a really good role if we do it right. But it's still it's not like we're getting rich on this, if you know what I
Ex-
mean.
yes,
Yeah.
and in all of that, just to almost summarize for everyone, I mean, it seems like it still is about everything we're experiencing here in the States, which is screaming the message, not in an unpleasant way. I guess I shouldn't have said screaming, but really elaborating on the message and making sure that people understand it and bringing it into that public forum, making sure politicians, those that are making and designing these policies, and I maybe even shouldn't say politicians, but those that are doing great hard work in our governments understand that these policies are actually really important and can add to whatever types of initiatives they're working on. And then ultimately continuing seemingly to refine and reiterate and then improve, and that cycle. And then again, education, support, and then reiterating all of that. And so it seems like that, again, needs to be something that we all need to do globally down to the micro level at the city level. And so, again, I thank you for this, joining us here, because I'm not rounding this out. But again, it's just very clear that these are more of the conversations we need to have across borders of cities, borders of states, borders of countries to say, hey, this is what's working and this is what's not, and trying to do that comparative analysis all the time, more consistently, trying to iterate ourselves out of these issues.
Oh, and by the way, I mean, Nordic Circular Hotspot, we usually do a lot of regular events where we try to hook up or kind of connect to the other hotspots of the world. So if you ever start a hotspot, circular hotspot in the States, please let us know so we can invite you to these meetings, because we want to see how we can help and collaborate with each other and help each other and support each other, and also give knowledge and know how we do things, and how other hotspots do things and so on.
I know we have those. We don't call them hotspots, but I know we've got different. I mean, Sabira and I have been a part of some of these here and there in different cities. That's absolutely something we should do. And anybody who's listening as well should reach out, because all of these are great opportunities to bring your communities together, and then reach out to these other communities and really help innovate. So yeah, that's actually, we could take that as an action item on ourselves here at Selling Circular, to kind of really say, okay, where are these and how are we helping connect these dots? And not just here on the podcast, but outside these walls as well.
Great.
So maybe to round us out, we started this conversation talking about passion, but Elin, from talking to you, it sounds like persistence, both at a macro and micro level, is what actually drives change. And that sounds like that's what's been partially successful for y'all. What words of advice do you have to listeners who kind of maybe feel hopeless sometimes?
Well, I think when you start working in sustainability, wherever it is, it doesn't have to be circular economy, you have to know that you're part of, the right side of history, where you're helping save the planet for future generations. And if that doesn't give you energy, I don't know what will do that, because that's what drives me. I get that question all the time. Well, how can you be so optimistic and have all the energy you have? And it's like, but hey, I'm saving the planet every day. And that gives me so much joy. It doesn't really matter if we succeed or not. I'm still doing it because it's the right thing to do. It's like, I guess it's a religion without a religion, where you're rooting for the planet and the well-being of tigers and lions and everything else living on the planet. It's like, what's the other option? There's no other option, right? So just join us and do it. It's beautiful.
I don't think we can end it any other better way. Elin, just do it. Borrowed from some other company, but just do it.
We'll
and
take
get
it
into
over.
the field. Yeah, exactly. We're taking it over. It's ours now. But just get out there and reach out to us. Reach out to your colleagues, your other peers. Let's try to figure these things out. Elin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.